It is said that once, a very angry man approached the Buddha and began to insult him with furious and offensive words. The Buddha listened in silence, without reacting with anger. When the man finally fell silent, exhausted, the Buddha gently asked him, "My dear friend, if you offer a gift to someone, but the person does not accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The man replied, confused, "Obviously, the gift still belongs to the one who offered it." The Buddha then said to him, "It is the same with your anger. I do not accept it, therefore it still belongs to you." This parable illustrates one of the main Buddhist teachings about the nature of anger. According to Buddhism, anger arises from the ego, attachment, and ignorance. When someone offends or mistreats us, our instinctive reaction is to become angry. But the anger does not belong to the other person. It is a projection of our own disturbed mind. The Buddha taught that anger, in fact, only harms ourselves. When we get angry, we enter a mental state of aversion, animosity, and hostility. This generates suffering, stress, and a series of negative effects, both for us and for those around us. Anger can lead to reckless and harmful actions that often end up worsening the situation. Moreover, Buddhism understands that anger arises from the illusion of the ego and attachment. When someone offends us, our angry reaction comes from the sense of I and mine. We feel threatened, insulted, and want to defend ourselves. But this notion of a solid and permanent self is actually an illusion. We are interdependent beings, constantly changing, and we do not have a fixed self that can truly be attacked. Therefore, the key to dealing with anger, according to Buddhism, is to recognize its illusory and transient nature. Anger is not something inherent to us, but a reaction conditioned by ignorance and attachment. When we understand this, we can choose not to react with anger, but to respond with patience, compassion, and mental serenity. A beautiful passage from the Dhammapada, the sacred Buddhist text, sums up this idea. Hatred never ceases through hatred. Through love alone it ceases. This is an eternal law. By cultivating love, understanding, and patience, we can transcend anger and find inner peace. This is the first essential step to removing anger from our lives. After understanding the nature of anger and how it arises from the illusion of the ego, the next essential step is to cultivate its opposite qualities, patience and compassion. Buddhism teaches us that the key to dealing with anger is not to try to suppress or deny it, but to transform it. And this is done through the development of patience, khanti, and compassion, karuna. There are countless inspiring stories of Buddhist masters who demonstrated these virtues even in the face of their worst enemies. One of them is the story of King Ashoka, one of the most powerful rulers in Indian history. Initially, Ashoka was a cruel leader, thirsty for conquests, expanding his empire through violent wars. However, after witnessing the horrors of one of his battles, he felt deep remorse and converted to Buddhism. Ashoka then devoted himself to spreading the Buddha's teachings throughout his vast kingdom. He built numerous monasteries and Buddhist stupas and sent missionaries to various regions. But one day, he learned that some of these missionaries had been killed in a distant province. Despite his formerly irascible temper, Ashoka responded to this news with complete patience and compassion. He sent an expedition not to seek revenge, but to preach the Buddhist teachings of nonviolence and mutual understanding. In doing so, King Ashoka demonstrated the transformative power of benevolence and wisdom. This story illustrates one of Buddhism's central teachings, that hatred can only be conquered by love. As the Buddha taught in the Dhammapada, hatred never ceases through hatred. Through love alone it ceases. This is an eternal law. Cultivating loving kindness, metta, and compassion, karuna, is essential to overcoming anger. When someone offends or mistreats us, the Buddhist response is not to retaliate with more anger, but to try to understand the pain and ignorance behind that behavior. We can then develop a sense of empathy and genuinely wish for that person to overcome their suffering. The Buddha himself is a vivid example of this quality of compassion. Even in the face of his worst enemies, he maintained an attitude of kindness, patience, and understanding. It is said that once, a man who deeply despised the Buddha began to insult him violently. The Buddha listened calmly and peacefully, and in the end, asked the man, "If you were to offer me a gift and I did not accept it, to whom would the gift belong?" The man, confused, replied, Obviously, the gift would still belong to you. The Buddha then said, "It is exactly the same with your anger. I do not accept it, so it remains yours." This is the power of Buddhist compassion. It allows us to respond to anger with serenity and understanding, breaking the vicious cycle of hostility. By cultivating patience and loving kindness, we can transform not only our own minds, but also the world around us. In addition to cultivating patience and compassion, another essential tool taught by Buddhism for dealing with anger is the practice of meditation and mindfulness. The Buddha constantly emphasized the importance of meditation as a means to calm the restless mind and develop inner serenity. He himself was known to spend long periods in deep meditation, reaching elevated states of consciousness. One of the most famous stories is the Buddha's meditation under the tree of enlightenment. It is said that the Buddha, determined to find the answer to human suffering, sat in the lotus position and entered into intense meditation. He remained there for 49 days, deeply absorbed, until he finally attained enlightenment. At that moment, the Buddha realized the true nature of existence, the impermanence of all things, the interdependence of all phenomena, and the inherent emptiness of the self. He saw how the root of anger and suffering lay in ignorance of this fundamental truth. From that point on, the Buddha dedicated his life to sharing these teachings on the nature of the mind and the practice of meditation. He taught various techniques such as breath observation, anapanasati, contemplation of the body, kayagattasati, and the cultivation of loving kindness, metta. All these meditative practices share the common goal of cultivating mindfulness, sati, the ability to be fully present, aware, and balanced, moment by moment. When the mind is absorbed in meditation, it is freed from distractions and emotional disturbances. This allows us to see the transient nature of anger, rather than being overwhelmed by it. As a beautiful passage from the Dhammapada states, "You are your own refuge. Who else could be your refuge?" Meditation teaches us to find this inner refuge, this sanctuary of peace and equanimity at the core of our own mind. It is from this solid foundation of mindfulness that we can then deal with anger and any other disturbing emotions. Cultivating mental stability through regular meditation and mindfulness practice is, therefore, an essential aspect of the journey to remove anger from life. When the mind is calm and awake, we are able to respond with wisdom and compassion, rather than react with impulses of anger. In this way, Buddhist meditation helps us develop essential emotional and mental skills to deal with anger in a transformative way. So far, we have explored the Buddhist teachings on the nature of anger, the importance of cultivating patience and compassion, and the practice of meditation to calm the mind. But all this knowledge will only have a real impact when we manage to apply it concretely in our daily lives. After all, what is the point of intellectually understanding these concepts if we are not able to put them into practice when we face challenging situations that trigger our anger? One of the most inspiring stories in this regard is that of the Buddhist monk Shantideva. He was a great scholar and teacher of the Buddha's teachings, but his patience and compassion were constantly tested by the other monks in the monastery. It is said that on one occasion, a monk became very angry with Shantideva and began to curse and insult him violently in front of everyone. Instead of reacting with anger, Shantideva remained unshaken, listening calmly and serenely. When the enraged monk finally grew tired, Shantideva gently said to him, "My friend, if you were to offer me a gift and I did not accept it, to whom would the gift belong?" The monk, confused, replied, "Obviously, the gift would still belong to you." Shantideva then explained, "It is the same with your anger. I do not accept it, so it remains yours." With this simple response, he demonstrated the Buddhist teaching of not responding to anger with more anger. Stories like this show us that true transformation happens when we are able to apply Buddhist teachings in concrete situations in our daily lives. It is not enough to merely understand the concepts intellectually. We must cultivate patience, compassion, and mental serenity as a way of life. This requires constant effort and great determination. But as we practice, we develop the ability to respond with equanimity, even when confronted by people or events that would normally provoke our anger. Buddhism teaches us that just as anger arises from mental conditioning, we can train the mind to develop opposite dispositions, such as loving kindness, empathetic understanding, and serene acceptance. And when we incorporate these positive mental states into our daily lives, they become our natural refuge in the face of challenges. As the Buddha says in the Dhammapada, "You are your own refuge. Who else could be your refuge?" At the end of the day, we are responsible for creating the conditions for peace and happiness in our own minds and lives. Therefore, I invite you to begin practicing the Buddhist teachings on dealing with anger as part of your daily life. Observe your emotional reactions, cultivate patience and compassion, and use meditation to calm and stabilize your mind. Gradually, you will see anger being replaced by a deep inner serenity. This is a challenging but immensely rewarding process. As we succeed in transforming our own minds and the way we respond to the world, we contribute not only to our own happiness but also to the peace and well-being of everyone around us.